Welcome friends to another 40k video. Today we look at the Arm of Fate, how it sustains Roboute, but he wants to be rid of it. What dangers would he face? Friends, let's find out. Spoilers for the short story Armour of Fate by Guy Haley. Roboute could hear the hum of the armour at all times, and he makes such a comment as Sicarius. He's been studying the armour. Blueprints scatter over his desk for a way to remove it. Between his Hand of Dominion and the Armour of Fate, it was hard for him to flex his spine, and so when he knocks paper to the ground, and he makes things worse when he tries to pick them up with his fingers and can't. And so he jokes, surprises Sicarius by saying, "Created by the Lord of all mankind, master of the greatest armies in the Imperium, and I cannot pick up a plastic flimsy." He stared at the offending articles. "My greatest enemy." Then he says about the Armour of Fate, "In this armour I can crush the skull of an orc warlord, but I cannot lift a cup of recaf, nor hold a pen." He shook his head ruefully. This armour has to come off. He understood the blueprints, but there was one question he could not answer. So Roboute seeks out the call inferior. It responds to him, first by listing all his honorifics. The avenging sun tells it to be silent. He asks if the armour of fate can be removed. The inferior is reluctant to respond, but the Primarch presses it. The inferior explains about itself that it does not go against the Crimson Accords, which state, "Thou shalt not craft a machine with the mind of a man," and says it can't reply to Guilliman's satisfaction. And so the avenging sun says, "We're done here." And Roboute seeks out the Eldari, and so later Guilliman's overlord gunship sets down upon a plain furred with fantastical natural sculptures of frost. A cliff of ice blue with age soared steeply in front of the landing ground. His warriors had uncovered a double doorway of sculpted psychoplastic decorated with simple curves. Despite having been subjected to the full force of metal weaponry, it was unmarked, remaining a pale colour close to bone, though worn with inner life. The door was only partly uncovered. The shape suggested a pointed archway, but a height only to Guilliman's head had been exposed. They parted as he approached, opening onto an elegant stairway completely free of ice. As he ducked through the doors, Guilliman's armour detected the subtle pressures of an atmospheric retention field, and there he meets Eldred Ulthran, Farseer of the Eldari, and Roboute greets him in their tongue. "And to you, son of the Emperor of mankind, my ally and my enemy. Enemy, I sometimes am to your people, and so I am grateful that you have come," said Guilliman. The tower room was well furnished, including a number of chairs. All were too small for his bulk, and so he remained standing. "I expended a great deal of effort in bringing you back to life," said Ulthran distantly. His attention was not wholly on the encounter. "I would be foolish not to heed your call if you are to fulfill your purpose. All men require guidance from time to time, and for all your father's art, you are mostly a man." "What is the purpose you have in mind for me?" said Guilliman. "That is not the question you came to ask, but I will answer it anyway. The task you must fulfill is the one you appointed yourself, that of the saviour of humanity." Ulthran looked down. "If it would not be offensive to suggest," he said, switching to Imperial Gothic, "I would prefer to conduct this conversation in your language. You are one of the few Sons of Terror who can speak our language at all. You do so very well, but there are certain subtleties you do not manage perfectly, and it grates upon my ears. I apologize for my lack of expertise," said Guilliman. "Not at all," said Ulthran, staring ahead. "This fault is yours, of course, but one day you will master it. Virtually none of your species, no matter how mighty, ever could, nor ever will." He caught a rune from the air, examined it, and set it in motion again. The rustle of his robes was loud in this city's immemorial silences. "I can feel your discomfort at this new era," Eldred said. His Gothic was accented in a way that imbued the language with fresh beauty. "I sense your pain. You have a great burden to bear, almost as great as mine. You and I both have seen all we hold dear cast down by folly, and are pained by the misery of what took its place. We are kindred spirits in a way. Ask your question. I will answer, as a favour, in recognition of our shared sorrows." "You already know what I want to ask." "Ask anyway," said Eldred Ulthran, "as you must." Guilliman looked away, casting his eyes over the perfectly preserved ghost room he found himself in. He wondered who had lived here, or if anyone ever had. The Eldari were enigmatic, and despite their physical similarities to humanity, were alien of thought. "For the last several months I have studied the workings of this armour that I wear, and that I have not removed, since it was placed upon my body years ago," he said. "I believe I understand how it functions. and what it does. Broadly speaking, the prophetess Yvraine warned me never to remove it, but I must. What I do now, what I ask of you, is whether I will survive its removal. This is not your famed caution at work, said Eldred Ulthron. That is rashness speaking. Leave it on if you are afraid. I am not afraid. I simply lack sufficient understanding to assess the risks. There is a personal element, of course. I have no desire to die again, and I cannot, for my concern, while calculating the probability of my death. The issue is that you understand full well what the armour does physically for you, but there is another element to it, an element of the spirit. I cannot give that credence, said Gilliman plainly. Eldred Ulthern gave a dry chuckle. How difficult it must be for you, a child of the Emperor's enlightenment, to judge these things. The armour sustains your soul. When you were wounded by your fallen brother, the cut went past flesh and wounded your eternal being. That wound will never heal. It is true I feel an emptiness inside myself, said Gilliman. That is the injury of the soul. Be that as it may, you have not answered my question. Will I survive? The question is wrong. It will be this question we must ask. It is not will you survive, but are you capable of surviving? And then Eldred raised his hand and gestured at the circling rune. These are the tools by which I might read the sky. These runes represent you. There are many of them, as you can see. Their interaction is complex, hard even for me to read. If I go into the other sea, where I may look directly upon the branchings of what may come to be, your path is difficult to follow. To remove the armour of fate risks not only death, but ultimate annihilation. Even if you do not die, its removal will affect you profoundly in a way you will find uncomfortable. There is grief woven tight about every possible future for you, Roboute Gilliman. Take off this armour, and the emptiness you feel grow to a void that can never be filled. Sorrow I can bear, he said. I've endured much of that, more than any being. What is a little more? You do not know my sorrow, said Eldred. He looked again at the Primarch. When his head shifted, Gilliman realized he could see the ceiling through the helm. Eldred was fading away. He must get his answer quickly, or not at all. You cannot know all of mine either, for all your psychic gifts. That is true, said the Farseer. Remove the armour if you wish. There will be consequences. Of what degree is down to you. It is an outcome dictated by your will and the strength of your own soul. Annihilation, death, or simply sadness. I cannot answer this question no more than could Cole's puppet. You can answer it only yourself and ask it only by doing. Then I will not die, said Gilliman firmly. Eldred nodded. That is entirely up to you. The Eldari and his runes were vanishing from view, a spectre caught in full sunlight. There is a further thing you have not said. Is there, said Gilliman. You wish to be free of the influence of my kind, Eldred said, his voice fading with his body. You see the armour as a gaoler, holding you hostage to our whims. Know this, the fate of humanity and Eldari are bound together. Either both species will survive or neither will. Your emperor understood this. There are greater enemies than the primordial annihilator. In the times to come, you will see. The struggle is only beginning. The old war returns. Ulthron was an outline, a shadow. Remember this conversation and consider carefully on the day realization comes whether you wish to stand alone. Eldred Ulthron was gone. Gilliman left the unliving city to itself. Gilliman chose his arming chamber for the task of removal. The day came quickly, and before he knew it, he was on the cusp of the moment. 4 high-ranking adepts of the cult mechanicus waited on his command, as did others, apothecaries, servitors, and such. Apart from the large, upright arming cradle made for his stature, the room was more operating theatre than armoury, being full of medical equipment, the air prickly with the astringent scents of counterseptic. A large section of the space was taken up with a Primarch-sized operating table, over which a multi-limbed Teresian hovered in readiness. Nobody spoke. Gilliman stood in the door, weighing his decision one final time. He looked behind him into the greater hall that housed his museum of weaponry. The lights in the grand hall of armaments were out, and the collection of armours it contained were dark silhouettes, all inert, simple machines that possessed none of the dangers his own war gear did. This section of the ship was the one most badly damaged by the Red Corsairs during their tenure. He remembered coming aboard after the vessel's retrieval, sorrowing at the damage done, soothing his anger by its restoration. He wondered, as he returned his gaze to the specially made machinery awaiting him, if he was risking similar damage to all the Imperium by taking this course of action. What if he died? I can be nobody's slave, he thought firmly. He stepped into the arming cradle and gripped the armrest so tightly that metal sang. Begin, he said. A servitor raised a cybernetic arm, the power tool mounted in place of its hand, already rotating. The bit engaged smoothly with a locking bolt upon the Primarch's greave. Gilman gritted his teeth as the bolt was withdrawn, and he took his fate back into his own hands. And that interesting but brief tale, friends, I will end today's video. Drop me a comment down below.